While we're waiting for this thing to get up and running, I just wanted to express my gratitude to Jason for asking me to speak, and my appreciation to all of you for allowing me into your Sangha for the night. I do normally teach on Fridays at this time. So a lot of you I don't get to see very often, so hi. I wanted to talk a little bit tonight about basically about volition. How do we create this experience of moving forward towards ending of our suffering? In the early teachings, the Buddha just talked very simply about not clinging. That was a persistent and clear message. And as he taught kind of longer and longer, the message got more nuanced. But in the early teachings, it really boiled down to don't cling. But then later on, he seemed, and from his perspective, being a guy who not only extraordinarily bright and talented, and committed, but having practiced diligently, unceasingly for 6 or 7 years, by the time he sort of figured out that mindfulness was the way forward. He had cultivated such a powerful momentum. And we arrive at the Dharma kind of starting from wherever we start. Most of us are not having a monastic experience. Most of us are not day in and day out being dedicated to practice. And, we sit for the time that we sit, we come and we enjoy listening to the Dharma. Hopefully, maybe we're reading some Dharma when we're home on our own time. And we get to enjoy this experience of Sangha. And hopefully together, the collection of these sorts of influences start to give us a little bit of momentum towards making consistent kind of choices that move us in the direction of liberation. But if you think about it, what we're trying to do is, work through the karma that we arrive in this lifetime with, in this moment with. And the karma is like, it's our perspective, right? This is the way that we see this present moment. And it's, obviously it's all we have to go on. An experience comes up, we have our perspective, and then we make kind of the best choice that we can make to move ourselves towards liberation, ideally. The Buddha would say, never doing anything that the wise would later reproach. That's a tall order. I don't know exactly what the wise would reproach anyway, but it might sound not very, that list of things might not be very fun. And So we have these very clear kinds of directions from the Buddha of what sorts of, a lot of it is stuff that don't do this, don't do that, cut that out, whatever you do, don't do that, right? There are the precepts, which are basically, I'm not going to do any of these 5 things, you know, I'm murdering, you know, larceny, you know, don't get wasted, no gossiping or hate speech, and don't sleep with anybody's spouse or significant other. It seems pretty like, but it's all don't do this, don't do that. And the way he lays these things out, it seems quite clear, like, oh, well, of course I would do that. Oh, you're not a terrible person. But not liberated yet. 13 years in, not liberated yet. And so obviously there's more to it than that. And so the Buddha says that what creates our karma is our intentional decision making. Right? The word karma means action. It doesn't mean there's a scoreboard in the universe somewhere waiting to drop a flower pot on my head because I kicked Johnny's wagon in 3rd grade. Like, that's not what it means. It means I have, because of everything that I have done, thought, felt, and paid attention to and experienced up to this moment, I have a certain perspective. It's really useful in some areas and totally useless in some other areas. It's my karma. And it's sort of it's almost like a momentum, right? I think about for some of us, that momentum, some of us in this community are in recovery. It's just sort of a nice black and white example. It applies to all decision making, but it's easy to see because it's sort of dramatic. So we have our karma, and this is my perspective, and then we have our volition, like I'm trying to make, and then we have these right parameters, like why these are the instructions of how I get moved towards liberation. This is sort of my perspective and my way of seeing the world, and I'm trying with these 2 things to use my volition to make a good decision. Like, this is the setup in every moment, kind of. But the thing is that my volition is not always as powerful. Under certain conditions, it's fighting a huge tide. So let's say that I'm somebody that had a substance abuse issue, which many years ago, I totally fucking did. And I arrive in sobriety, right? And I'm saying to myself, well, I'm definitely not going to drink or do drugs anymore. Right? But my perspective says, drink and do drugs. Any excuse is a good reason. And in contrast to that megaphone, and not only that, but my lifestyle and the people that I know and how my body feels and how my skill set on how I make money and how dodgy I am and how weird I feel about that. And right, and all of these things are the conditions of the moment. This is my karma. And my volition is like, don't do drugs, you know? And all these other conditions are saying like, whoa, you definitely have to do some drugs. You must. That's not even, why are we talking about this still? And the karmic impact of my actions doesn't care about my conditions. That is fixed. If I murder or steal, right? If I get drunk again, there's a karmic debt to pay, regardless of how difficult or easy that is. And so So we're here because we want to reduce suffering, right? But it's not always exactly obvious how to do that, I think. Because we struggle with delusion. We're all deluded. We're ignorant. In some moments, what seemed like the right choice, in retrospect, was the wrong choice. You know? And so in retrospect, I can see, yes, I was deluded. But a lot of the time, it's hard to know in the moment. You know, I'm dealing with these habitual kinds of reactions to stimulus, right? When something hurts, I don't want it. My natural response, you know, most of the time is aversion. It's not naturally compassionate. It's occasionally naturally compassionate now after 13 years of practice. But, and when the first time that happens, actually, it's quite a weird shock. I don't know if you guys have felt that yet, but all of a sudden pain comes up and instead of being like, what? Or like, fuck, it's like, oh. So let's say that that's something like a wise, spontaneous response. That is a result, that's my karma in that moment. And the conditions that got me there are important because left to my own devices, my volition cannot hang against the power of all of my past karma. And I need good conditions, right? And so I guess what I'm leading up to here a little bit is the importance of Sangha. One thing the Buddha said is like, he was being questioned. I can't remember which one of his attendants, monks, that has the name that starts with an A, Ananda, or one of those guys, he's always questioning him, you know, trying to get it right. I need to have these instructions exactly correct. And probably so he could pass them on to us. But he goes, so exactly what is it, Buddha, that leads to, that creates the conditions that lead to awakening? And the Buddha said at one time, you know, I've never seen one thing that leads, that creates such an advantageous set of conditions for awakening as wise friendships. Which at first, again, not obvious. You would think I'm waiting for him to say, like in the very next word, like meditation, like mindfulness practice, right? Concentrate yourself. What? But wise friendship seems a little bit secondary. Yes, it's great to have wise friends, but why is that so helpful? But my teacher Noah wrote this book called Against the Stream, right? And this is a quote from the Buddha, like what we're doing is so unnatural and so radical and so against the very stream of our nature of consciousness and physiology and culture and training and history, that little volitional voice against all of those conditions oftentimes doesn't stand a chance. And like in real time, what that can look like is I'm paying attention to my breath and now I'm in next Tuesday. And I don't even remember making that choice. And it seems so simple. Well, if we pay attention to the breath and we get absorbed in the present moment experience, so yes, of course I would do that. And then like, gone. What is it that I'm having for groceries tomorrow? I gotta, well, what just happened? And having a distracted kind of a mind, having a mind that, having a perspective that chases after pleasure, that expects pleasure, that expects pain to be fled from and distracted and deleted as fast as possible, that's my habit, that's my expectation, even unconsciously. These forces, these unconscious habitual forces create my decision making. And it's not always conscious. Like, it's just like, I will flee from the breath without meaning to. And in regular society, normal. People don't do this shit. People don't gather on a Wednesday night, at 7:30 Pacific Standard Time, and gather on a Zoom call to discuss the Dharma. I don't know what they're doing, but it's not this. This is rare. And it's why, just to reference the sobriety thing again, it's why sober communities are so important. Because it normalizes something really weird, which is being in this world without altering your consciousness. That's not the typical way, not in this culture. And so it's confusing and it's easy to get sidetracked. The Dharma is the same way. My experience, it's the same way. And having people around who are on this journey too, together, helps to normalize it. And what we ultimately start to get is a little bit of a perspective shift. And the things that seemed pleasant before, the things that in the present moment, my karmic perspective would be like, yes, that is the obvious choice, seem terrible now. Thankfully, over time we learn, oh, this is a little bit wiser choice. This is a little bit wiser choice. Okay. And we pay close attention and we do the mindfulness practice and we show up in Sangha and we hear people talking and maybe we read this Dharma and we practice a little bit more and we notice stuff. And the things that were external concepts that maybe sounded cool to us at one time, or probably still, I think they're cool, right? These Dharma ideas start to become first-person perspective, little by little. That's becomes our karma because that's been our action, that's been our behavior. And all of a sudden we see through the eyes, oh, it's very obvious that certain behaviors just lead to suffering. And certain behaviors lead to less suffering. Whether they go all the way to awakening, I cannot personally say. But the fact that they go to less suffering, that I can personally say. There's a great, I love the stories from the suttas. And if you've heard me talk before, you may have heard me tell this one. But I like to illustrate what I'm thinking with these stories, obviously, because the Buddha's ideas are way better than mine. Okay, so there was this guy in 2,600 years ago in India, and he was a hedonist. And I think he was the leader, but he had this hedonist cult, right? And they were sex, drugs, and rock and roll people, right? My Life with the Thrill Kill cult was basically what was going on. And he heard that of course, the Buddha was extremely famous by this point. And that Buddha is all about renunciation and creating the conditions where wise choices are much easier. And renounce these powerful kinds of overwhelming feelings so that you don't get confused. Magandaya hated the Buddha. He called him Gautama the Destroyer because he would make everything that he thought was fun sound not fun. Right? So he had a bone to pick with the Buddha, and he kind of called him out. Of course, the Buddha is willing to talk to anybody, so he's like, "Oh, Magandaya, I hear that you hate me. Please come in, let's have tea. Tell me all about it." And Magandaya reads him kind of his version of the Riot Act, and he's like, "I don't understand what's going on here. You make everything that I think is fun sound terrible. What's the deal?" And the Buddha says, What do you think, Magandaya? There's a man who has leprosy on his legs. And his legs are full of, the Buddha loved a dramatically grotesque story too. It's like his legs are full of sores, open oozing wounds, full of worms, and that itch and burn and torment the man. And then if the man would see a coal pit fire with a poker in it, and the man might go to that coal pit fire and take out the poker and lay the red hot poker onto his wounds and cauterize his diseased legs. Margandai, would you think that that man was feeling pain or relief? And Margandaya says, well, relief. You know, it's better to have the persistent suffering end, even if it's in this dramatic way. And he said, okay. So imagine, Magandaya, that this man's friends got together and they got their money together and they paid for him to go to the doctor. The doctor gave him some medicine and cured his leprosy, and he was healed. And his legs were no longer, didn't have lesions on them. And let's say that at that time, he walked by a coal pit fire and he saw a red hot poker in that fire. Would that man still want to put the poker onto his legs? And he said, well, no. He said, why not? He said, well, it's painful, hot, and scorching to the touch. And the Buddha says, well, was that fire always painful, hot, and scorching to the touch? And Magandaya says, yes. And he says, just so. When a man is suffering, even the most unskillful action can feel like relief. But once a man has a healed perspective, once he's healed, once he's awakened, he can see clearly what things are skillful and which things are not. And he said one more thing in this story. He said, Magandaya, imagine that then this man whose wounds are healed and who doesn't want the fire to touch his legs, that two strong men grab him by the arms and start dragging him towards the fire. Would that man squirm and kick and scream and try to get away? And Magandaya says, yes, absolutely. He said, well, how come? He loved the fire before. So, well, now it's painful, scorching to the touch. And the Buddha said, those men are our habit. These are our habitual actions that take us back over and over again to behaviors that cause us pain. And this is the habitual nature of our minds. And again, one way of saying this is our karma. This is what we inherit from all of the things that we have learned and done and thought and felt and paid attention to. And sometimes what makes sense is this incredibly destructive behavior because it's better than the suffering that we have. And sometimes our volition isn't strong enough to keep the power of our habit from pushing us back into more suffering. It's worth saying also that this is where we need to have compassion for ourselves. Because the obvious fact here is that shifting our perspective is not a one-time choice. It's a process. And along the way, we're probably going to be victim of our habit, of our karma, and that our volition, good-natured and good-willed and strongly intentioned though it may be, might fail to make a skillful choice under certain conditions. And that shit hurts. And so while we work towards improving our ability to wake up and end our suffering and make wise choices, and ultimately, I guess what I'm talking about is seeing things clearly, seeing each choice as moving us towards more suffering or towards the ending of our suffering, not always obvious to us. And it's important to make the conditions as conducive for that as we can, surrounding ourselves with Sangha, showing up for, even if we're on Zoom, showing up to be together. And then understanding, having compassion for ourselves, knowing that this is a process. And that when we struggle, when it's difficult, when we get discouraged or bored or anxious or whatever, that's not a new reason to attack ourselves, but it's a new reason for us to have compassion for ourselves. So, I don't know, some thoughts about volition and wise friendships. We'll sit for a half an hour in a couple of minutes, but I know that Jason sometimes makes space for questions about the practice, or if anything that I just said didn't make a ton of sense or made sense and you wanted to comment. Does anybody have any questions or comments at this time? Okay. So I'll lead a guided meditation. We'll sit for 30 minutes. And then we will have sort of an open forum discussion if you'd like to stay for that afterwards. So taking the opportunity to find your meditation posture, allowing the eyes to be closed. And we will begin with the sound of the bell. Taking a moment to arrive where you are in the body. And noticing what the conditions are that you brought to this moment. Without judging or needing it to be any kind of way. Simply addressing this moment with some friendliness and acceptance, and noticing what it's like. Is there tension? Is there ease? Is the mind restless, agitated, clear, calm? See if you can notice the circumstances without having a preference. Seeing if you can identify any parts of the body where you're holding tension. And if you are, simply softening towards them. Tension in the face, jaw, neck or shoulders. Tension in the belly. While maintaining a posture that's upright, allowing the muscles and tendons to relax. And taking the opportunity to notice all the different aspects of your experience and regarding them with a friendly attitude. Nothing is pushed away, nothing is wrong. Everything is allowed. All types of sensation and mental formations. Within all of this experience, allowing the formations of the mind to perhaps drift somewhat into the background and turning the attention towards the physical sensations in the body. Noticing initially perhaps the contact points that let you know that your human body is being pulled downwards towards the earth by gravity. And then with the intention of cultivating a perspective that is non-judgmental and investigative, noticing what is the easiest to identify or connect with sensation in your body, and getting curious about that. What can you notice about the pressure, potentially the texture? If the pressure is hard or soft, is there a temperature associated with it? Taking a moment to really explore that sensation and notice everything you can about it. Does it change? If you find that you have become entangled in a thought, simply returning your attention to the physical sensation, exploring that sensation without judgment and with curiosity. And from this perspective, grounded in the sensation of the body, notice any physical sensations that let you know that you're breathing. Holding that investigative attention on the easiest to access physical sensation. Noticing the breath as well. Notice if you can your volitional intent to remain curious and investigative, attention on the physical sensations, and notice if you can, if there's any karmic tendency to become distracted. Every effort that we make to return to the sensations of the breath and the body over and over again gently, slowly moves our first person perspective more in alignment with awakening. As the Buddha said, like drops of water on a stone create a divot. More drops of water on a stone eventually create a stream, a crack. Slowly our perspective is shaped by our practice. See if you can continue to hold the experience of sensation of contact between your body and the chair or the ground, and the sensation of your body breathing, the breath going in, the breath going out. Where do you most easily know the breath? See if you can ignore all of the mental formations that might be coming up and forthrightly direct your attention at the physical sensations that are happening right now. And then an invitation to expand your awareness to include the sensations of the entire body in the breath. Holding an awareness of all the different pressures and tingling and sensations of temperature, texture. Noticing how the breath moves many parts of the body. Directing your attention over and over again back to the experience of this moment, these physical sensations. Your body is a place of refuge and rest. Not fighting any aspect of your experience. Simply choosing amongst all the various types of thoughts, feelings, emotions, and sensations that might be going on right now to direct your awareness towards the body. For the last few minutes, just an invitation to allow the attention to rest on the sensations of the breath going in and the breath going out, grounded in the body. Great. So whenever you're ready, coming back into the room here and allowing your eyes to be open. And in just a second, I will stop the live stream and we can hopefully hang out and have a bit of a conversation about our experience. And before I do that, before I stop the recording, I want to remind everybody that these talks are given by donation. That Against the Stream exists completely on the donations of its Sangha. And I do not have an assistant with me tonight to drop the link into the chat, but it is at againstthestream.com/donations. If you feel moved to donate, please do. We suggest $15 or so for the drop-in classes. And trying to keep the doors open in Venice this time where people aren't able to show up, so that we'll have a place to show up when all this dust settles. But of course, thank you, Michael. If you're, so Michael has posted the link into the chat there. If for whatever reason you don't feel moved to or cannot donate right now, please do keep coming. Your presence is far more important than your money. Absolutely. So that being said,